Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we have a really exciting topic to talk about as it has just been reported this afternoon that the Jacksonville Jaguars have legitimate interest in trading for star pass rusher Danielle Hunter from the Minnesota Vikings. So this may seem, first of all, like a headline we've talked about before, right? Because we talked about this a little bit in the offseason. There was reported interest from Trent Baalke and Doug Pearson in acquiring Danielle Hunter. This was going on during the conversations about his contract. He was ultimately owed, I believe, $5.5 million going into the year, which is a gross misrepresentation of what he's worth as a player. And so Minnesota and Danielle Hunter were not able to negotiate an extension. However, they did work on a new contract. And that new contract for this year only ended up taking him off the trade block. And so he ended up earning, it would be about $17 million this year with the opportunity for $20 million with incentives. So when that happened, we're looking at Danielle Hunter and any chance he has of going to Jacksonville, we're thinking, well, Minnesota's probably going to be a good team. They went 13-4 last year. Even if they don't have as much luck, I think they have a better roster. And some people may disagree, but they have a good roster in Minnesota. They have good players. That's why we're talking about Danielle Hunter on their team, because he's one of those guys on the defense. And so we thought there's probably not a chance that Minnesota is going to be trading away players at the trade deadline. And he's probably going to be a guy that we're going to have to go after in free agency and compete with other teams for realistically. Well, here we are, heading into week 6 of the season. Got Broncos Chiefs tonight coming up shortly for me. It's 6:28 Central Time on a Thursday. And we're thinking, this might be possible because Minnesota is 1-4. They have had a lot of close games, but they have not won them. They're really far back. The Detroit Lions are 3 games ahead of them. They look like a fantastic team, one of the best teams in the NFL right now. And Minnesota finds themselves really high in the draft order. We'll take a look at it here just to give you guys an idea of where they sit. There's a lot of 1-6 teams. But Minnesota, as of now, is in 4th place in NFL draft order. As much as Kirk Cousins has performed really admirably this year and probably is having one of his best seasons as a quarterback, it's no secret that Kirk Cousins can be improved upon. Now, you have to get the right guy, right? But this is a draft that is loaded with a ton of quarterbacks. And you guys will hear all about them when we get into this offseason. There's going to be a lot of people drafted, a lot of people that teams are going to believe in. It's a prime opportunity for a team like Minnesota to go in on that. You also have news like Justin Jefferson going to IR after suffering an injury in this last game against Kansas City. Does he even come back and play? Because he has no contract past his rookie deal. And if there's any player in the NFL outside of the quarterback position that's earned a new contract, it would be Justin Jefferson. So Minnesota's got a ton of questions. It's kind of questionable whether they are going to be able to compete the rest of this year. And so this source talking about this kind of notes that later on. We won't listen to that part, but they talk about how Minnesota is going to probably wait a week or two and see where they sit, because if they go and have these huge wins, like they'll probably beat the Chicago Bears. But if they somehow manage to beat the 49ers, they're 3-5. Now, is that likely? Absolutely not. And I mean 3-4, not 3-5. Realistically, Minnesota's sitting at 2-5, heading into that week 8, which is right before the trade deadline, which follows week 8. So they still have some hope at this point. It's still a good football team, but they're just so far behind the 8 ball that it's hard for them to catch up, especially in a division with a 4-1 division leader that looks like they're not going to slow down anytime soon. So this report came out. And it'll seem like it's not from that legitimate of a source because of the name of the Twitter page that's quoting this, or the X page. But this is quoting something off of one of the radio shows in Minnesota. This comes from Score North. It is from Wolfson. I don't know his first name, but he is one of the insiders with the Minnesota Vikings, knows a lot of what's going on in the locker room, close to the team. One of the best resources that you can have inside of a football organization. And so he talked about the possibility of some of these guys getting traded, and the only team that he talked about that had tons of interest right now was the Jacksonville Jaguars. So let's go ahead. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I know this. Jacksonville has all sorts of interest in Danielle Hunter. What are they willing to offer?
Yeah.
Right? Can you complete that trade? Kirk is different with the no trade power.
All right. We'll go ahead and pause there because they talk a lot about Kirk as well. You got to imagine for Minnesota, obviously, that is the bigger conversation because that's your franchise quarterback you're talking about. But that is really big news for Jacksonville right now and for our fans because we've talked about Danielle Hunter a lot, but the idea that there was legitimate interest was only a rumor before. We thought it was probably there. It made sense. But we just don't really know at this point if they're going to go make a big move, if they're going to go after like a Frank Clark, or if they're just going to sit pat and say, hey, we've got Devon Hamilton coming back. DeJuan Smoot's going to be playing again. We've got our reinforcements coming in. And based off of this, and also based off some of these reports you got throughout the offseason of going after players like Darius Slay, who, I mean, they're going to cost a lot of money, but they'd be a huge deal for the team to have. They are great players. It's very clear Jacksonville has been considering the idea of getting a superstar on this team to throw on to this unit, specifically the defense, to see if we can transform that from an overachieving unit like it has been this year into a truly elite one that we could look at as top 5 in the NFL. I think they're close right now, but without another guy aside from Josh Allen, they're really just not there yet. So this is great news. I think out of all the options you have, because you've got other guys like maybe Chase Young, Brian Burns, Frank Clark, some of those kinds of players, heck, even Justin Houston you might be able to trade for. They're not huge needle movers, or they're going to cost way too much. Like a Brian Burns, who's probably going to be a first, and then another really high pick, if not another first. I just think that's too much for the Jaguars to give up. Whereas Danielle Hunter, before the season, we were talking about maybe a 4th or 5th. I think that's a little low. But maybe you get away trading, say, the compensatory pick you got from Jawan Taylor. And say you throw in a 5th or a 6th with that. I think that's something that could get this deal done. Because you have to consider for Minnesota that right now, this is about getting draft picks for this next year. They have to get something out of Danielle Hunter. Will they get a compensatory pick? Sure. But if they want to tank, if they want to make this easier on themselves, and this is one of their best players on their defense, probably easily the best guy on the front 7 right now, if you trade away Danielle Hunter, that's going to make that a lot easier. And if he's not a part of your future long-term plans, you get as much as you can. And that compensatory pick that Jacksonville holds is the highest compensatory pick in this draft. Because Jawan Taylor's contract was worth so much, he's a young player, and so we end up getting awarded that. So that kind of pick makes sense. The issue that you could have is if they ask for a lot more, then you might have to go into the 2025 draft. Because for the Jaguars, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th picks that they own that were theirs, first of all, the ones that they earned, not that they traded for, those picks are currently tied up in the Calvin Ridley trade. Now, it'll probably end with it being a 2nd-round pick going out to the Falcons because Ridley will probably get extended and he'll probably be a part of this team for a long time. We still technically don't know that right now. And so we can't go send a 3rd-round pick that was our own, like 90th overall or whatever it ends up being, because we don't know if we have to send that to the Falcons yet. But that compensatory pick works really well. There's also the Saints 4th rounder that we collected last year by just trading out of the draft. And I think we got like a 7th as well. So those are all options that the Jaguars could use. I do not think that this is going to be a trade that's going to take a 1st or 2nd rounder because of the situation the Vikings are in, because of how little time is left on Danielle Hunter's contract. I think that Jacksonville can get away with a 3rd. And if they can do that, this is a pick that's 100% worth it. So now that we've talked about what this is probably going to cost for the team, we want to look at the cap. We want to think about how this defense is going to function too. At this point, we're talking about Danielle Hunter and what he brings. Let's actually take a look at where he lines up. I want to give you guys an idea of what he offers. So Danielle Hunter is more of a 3-4 outside linebacker. You'll see this by his snap positions. We'll sort it by where he's lined up the most. This is outside the tackle, and then you have the outside linebacker lineup. This is where he is most of the time. And then you see 10 snaps at right ends. This is on the defensive line, probably hand in the dirt. So for Danielle Hunter, that's really where he functions. So what happens if you bring him in, he's probably going to be playing probably on the side of Trayvon Walker. I would imagine that both the players move a fair bit to the line, but this probably puts Walker on the line more consistently. The way that this should not be taken is that Trayvon Walker is a bust and he's being moved on from. Because it's not at all the scenario. There are plenty of positions on the defense that he can play. There's plenty of positions available. And what this ultimately probably does is it takes guys like, say, Yasir Abdullah or Caleb Chason, or even possibly Dewan Smoot when he comes back, and it limits their snaps. I would think about this realistically as essentially Caleb Chason being replaced on the defense would be a fair way of thinking about it. But Danielle Hunter is going to get more snaps, and some of the air guys are going to lose a few of them throughout the game, which is that a bad thing? Maybe not, because you're going to have fresher players then. You're going to have more production. I mean, imagine Trayvon Walker on the defensive line with Danielle Hunter coming around the edge. Is that not a better pass rush unit? I think it's great. So that's probably what you're going to see from him. You've essentially got 3-4 outside linebackers right now, 3 of them. So you've got a lot of guys to play with. You've got a lot to work with. You can have an injury and survive. And ultimately, I think this is probably the best route for the team to keep all these players going forward. So if they pull this off, let's take a look at what this would look like. So realistically, this trade's probably happening halfway through the season, roughly. Could be 9 or 10 games left on the season. Minnesota, because he played for them, would eat about half of this cap. And the amount he's being paid that they could transfer to us would be essentially $11.5 million. I would imagine they take some of the cap hit, and realistically, you can get the cap space below this number so that you're not going over the cap this year. So you're probably looking at, let's say, what it originally was, and you're just paying him that for half the year. So we'll say $5.5 million. So now you got Danielle Hunter in the building. In this next offseason, there's a bigger issue because you've got to get Danielle Hunter re-signed if you want to make that worth it, unless you just want to let him walk for a compensatory pick, which I would not prefer to do. I think you really need him. There's a lot of moves the Jaguars can make to re-sign all these guys. So first of all, let's rework this with Danielle Hunter because we're going to add on these extra years. Just give you a general idea of what this looks like. And will these be the specific numbers if this happens? No. But I still want you guys to kind of understand what this could end up looking like. So you have this for the first year, and then you're probably extending him, I'd say 2 seasons at this point because he is a bit older of a player. He's 28 right now, turning 29 soon. Maybe you could go 3 years, but you're probably looking at about $20 million. And if you're converting a bunch of that money into signing bonus, realistically, you're looking at something like this, where if it's $20 million in signing bonus, $10 million goes to that first year and $10 million goes to the second. So as general numbers, this would be kind of what it looks like. So you got $40 million here, right? But it's backloaded. You see a ton of cap space at this point. They're going to have room to work with in the future, although this is going to be where you're re-signing a lot of that Urban Meyer draft class where you've got a lot of good players who are going to earn a lot of money. But that gets you Danielle Hunter back. You're going to also save money from the guys who end up leaving the team. Realistically, at this point, Cam Robinson is going to be a player that they cut the next season. I do not think that he would be traded this year just because of the injury to Walker Little. We've seen this offensive line take a lot of hits over the season. I just don't think it's worth it seeing that now. If there weren't injury concerns, I'd be all aboard, and I could still justify it right now, but the team's not going to be in the same boat as me. So next season, you're probably moving on because you've got Walker Little at left tackle. He is a fantastic left tackle. I think he can be better than what Cam Robinson is, and he's cheap one more season. So you move on from a guy like him. You're probably moving on from Foley Fatukasi as well. And so you see, it doesn't save a ton of money, but what it does is it frees up money in these seasons because the void cap hits end up hitting in 2024. So you see this goes up to 120 million. So that helps out. And now essentially here, this says 47 million, but keep in mind this already factors in the rollover from the year before. So you're probably talking about 5.5 million going away. This is probably 42 million that the team is working with. And you've got guys like Josh Allen, Trey Herndon, Calvin Ridley, Dwan Smoot, and aside from that, Brandon McManus, Jamal Agnew, and then a lot of cheap options like Gregory Jr. You're going to give him the tender because he's just going to be going into his third year. So getting all these guys when you're backloading deals, that's not going to be an issue. The Jaguars are going to be able to bring them all in. I could add them on here, but I'm just telling you, the cap hits like Josh Allen, he's probably going to be like 6 or 7 million that first year. Trey Herndon, probably giving him 3 million to bring him back. I think that's probably a good move at this point based on how he's performed. Calvin Ridley, he's probably getting around the same amount of money as Josh Allen. And you're probably looking at that 7 or 8 million cap hit, kind of like what Christian Kirk has first year. Dwan Smoot, probably 4 or 5 million. So you factor in all these numbers, you're well under what you need to hit for the salary cap. You've got room for your rookies, and you've got things you can do in the long-term future. And there will be players on this team that ultimately do not perform good enough to stay on the team. There's always things that happen, unfortunately. Of course, we're not rooting for that, but it's just a part of the game. There's guys that get extensions with teams or get signed on that just do not stick around. And so that's probably going to happen. Money's going to get saved from that. The cap hit is going up and up and up right now. Or sorry, cap space that is. So I'm not too concerned about what this does for cap. I don't think you make like a huge move next offseason, but you still got the ability to bring in a solid football player. You know, say like Ezra Cleveland hits free agency and you want to bring him in, or heck, if you want to trade for him right now. Not that I'm advocating for that, but if you want to get a player like that that's maybe 8 or 9 million, you still got room. So for Danielle Hunter, just to wrap this up, the Jaguars have interest. The Jaguars want him. The Jaguars have the picks that can get this done, whether it's this year or the next year. That is all there. And can they afford him? They can. They can afford him. They can afford Josh Allen. And you go into the future with a defense that I believe legitimately can play at an elite level. At that point, what are we looking for? Probably a defensive tackle to pair with this team. Outside of that, you're just getting young guys to develop. You're getting your future players. So you got to feel good about it if the Jaguars pull this off. But there's things that still got to happen. The Vikings got to lose. They got to be sellers. And the Jaguars have to offer the best offer. The good news, they're the one team right now that is being reported with legitimate interest. And for that reason, I think it's most likely that he ends up with the Jacksonville Jaguars by the trade deadline by the end of this month. So, exciting news. If you guys got any questions on it, any of the details, feel free to ask me. I love answering that. I love talking about these kind of things. So, thanks for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.